jump right in here. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for how good you are to us, Lord. And I hate to say this, but thank you for the cold. Thank you for reminding us that you're the God that controls all the seasons, Lord. You control everything, Lord. Just thank you again for this beautiful day. Thank you that we have a church like this to go to where we actually can come in and not just hear God's word, but we can actually be warm at church, Lord. Thank you for that. We appreciate it, Lord. Keep us safe as we're going to and from. Give Pastor the words and the wisdom as he gets ready to preach for this morning. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Daniel chapter 6. Daniel chapter 6. Just a reminder, next week is Harvest Sunday. We are doing a giveaway here in Sunday school class. The person that brings the most visitors to class has an option to win a brand new Bible. It's called a journaling Bible. It's the one that both Pastor Bish and myself use. So again, bring as many visitors as you can. The whole point of the day isn't just for giveaways. The giveaways is just to entice those that don't normally come to church to possibly visit us for the day. Every adult visitor will be given a gift that day in the morning service, and really it's just to make the gospel that much sweeter. You give somebody a little bit of honey goes a long way. What was it, Mary Poppins? A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. You realize the gospel's not exactly the easiest thing for somebody that's not saved to understand. You're a terrible human being that's going to hell, but there's hope. It's the first part that's the hard. So a little bit of a gift, a little thing here and there, just kind of helps that seem a little bit easier. And we're not watering down the gospel, trust me. That's not what happens. But if it gets people here, we'll get people here. So please invite friends, family, bring some visitors next week. We'll go from there. Daniel chapter 6. I am not going to even remotely attempt to tell you we're going to get all the way through Daniel in the lion's den today. I just know me, and I have way too many notes to get through this morning. We are literally going to look at every single verse in Daniel chapter 6 at some point between today and next week. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in here. Daniel chapter 6. 2 weeks ago, we finished up looking at just kind of the history behind Daniel. Again, Daniel is one of the most well-known prophets in the Bible. Alexander the Great himself recognized the prophesyings of Daniel. If you look through Daniel, most of his prophecy has come true. Most, not all. He did have some prophecies that tie in with the book of Revelation, if you will, end times, apocalypse type prophecies, but most of what he had was kingdom based. As far as the Babylonians who captured him in the first place were going to get taken over by the Medes and the Persians, which happens, and that's actually where we're at here in Daniel chapter 6. They end up getting taken over by the Greeks by the Romans by, and that one's up to a little bit of interpretation. Most people believe possibly the Roman Catholic Church is the very bottom of that statue we talked about with Nebuchadnezzar. We're going to look at that. That was his dream. That's where Daniel got promoted, remember? While he was still in that 3-year testing training phase, and you can see all that in Daniel's chapter 1 and 2. Here in Daniel chapter 6, there are a lot of people, Bible commentators, Bible students, people that are considerably smarter than I am, that like to use Daniel chapter 6 here as a kind of a prophetic idea or an Old Testament, if you will, epiphany kind of a concept of what God is going to do with the 144,000 Jews in Revelation. With your finger in Daniel chapter 6, go to Revelation chapter 7 for me real quick. Revelation chapter 7. Told you we're not going to get too much into the prophecy. I'm just giving you a possibility here. Revelation chapter 7, and we're just going to look at verse 4. The whole thing actually is verses 4 through 8. But verse 4 is the big one here. And I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. These are those that are going to be saved during the tribulation. They're going to go out and become witnesses on Jesus' behalf during the tribulation. A lot of people actually use Daniel chapter 6 as kind of a picture of that, because here Daniel is, and he's being controlled by one of the most wicked kings in history, who's regularly considered a serpent and a lion by his own accord and those that studied him, and they throw him to the lions. They tried to kill him, but God preserved them. Now, I'm not wholeheartedly bent on the fact that Daniel chapter 6 is a picture of what happens in Revelation 7, because read the Bible. God's preserved his people no matter what. That includes the Jews. That includes us, by the way. If you look through Baptist and Christian history, God's preserved us time and time and time again. Every time somebody tries to shut us up, somebody else springs up somewhere and starts preaching and talking. So I'm not entirely sold on the fact that this is specifically talking about those group of people in Revelation 7. I think it's just another picture that God is all-powerful and he's going to preserve and take care of his people no matter what's going on. Daniel chapter 6, verse 1. Go back there quickly. I told you we're going to kind of go through every single verse in here today. Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Daniel was immediately here put in a position of rulership. We talked about that 2 weeks ago in Daniel chapter 2. Verse 1 here, it says, "It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom." Okay, let's pause. This kingdom, by the way, this is the Medo-Persian kingdom. The Babylonian kingdom was quite large. It covered an area that would have been about 2.5 to 3 times the size of Texas. Texas is ginormous, by the way. So we're talking a very large area. Okay, big area. The Medo-Persian Empire was 3 times larger than the Babylonian Empire. Huge. These 120 princes, by the way, these guys ruled over different chunks of the kingdom. It would have been what you and I recognize today as states. Okay? If we let one person, the president, control everything that happens in all 50 states, we're exactly what we were fighting in the Revolutionary War. That's a tyrant-level, absolute monarchy type of a government. Those don't work. Not for long, at least. Okay? So we broke it up, and we have 50 states plus Guam and Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is basically a state without being a state. They have a representative, all kinds of stuff. Okay? There's U.S. citizens, the whole 9 yards. So we've got this government. What that does is the president can say whatever he wants, but if Congress doesn't agree with him, it stops. The last 2 years of President Obama's presidency, the government did nothing for 2 years. You realize that. Because we had a Republican-controlled House and Senate, House and Senate, and a Democrat-controlled White House. They got nothing done for 2 years, which, to be honest with you, was awesome. Because if they would have gotten some of the stuff done that the White House wanted, we might be worse off than we are today. Okay? Because the Affordable Health Care Act passed when they had control of everything. You realize the new tax bill that they want to introduce, which, by the way, is a mess. The Republicans can't think. Apparently, those of us that are conservative are really bad at math. They decided, hey, let's base all Republicans off Tim Bish, and they're going to be awful at math, okay? They did that. Do you know, honestly, the one part of the Affordable Care Act, they pull out the individual mandate. This isn't a politics class. They pull that out. It will immediately save American taxpayers $43 billion a year. Immediately. Which, by the way, there's also constitutional amendments that the government is never allowed to make you purchase anything. They actually broke the law to pass a law. Moving on. Okay. I have issues with our government, okay? Just, they're not all bad. Just a lot of them are dumb. They're really dumb in some cases. It's like, really? There was one guy got up the other day, I was watching C-SPAN. Anybody else weird like me and actually enjoys C-SPAN every once in a while? Those people are just, it's like comedy, it's dumb. He got up and, we need to impeach President Trump by Christmas. This guy gets paid by the government to be a representative and he wants to impeach Trump. In his words, we need to kick him out of office. I don't know if you know this, but that's not what impeachment does. It goes to trial. Moving on. Okay, so these 120 princes, these would have been like governors of the different states. Okay, they held the title of prince because the whole idea was based off of royalty. We have a king here. Okay, so these princes are set up here, these 120, and they're in charge of different sections, similar to a governorship, a state. That way, it's kind of a bureaucracy, divide and conquer type of a concept here. Verse 2, and over these were 3 presidents. So the king consolidated even further and divided the kingdom of these 120 princes. Each of them was in control of roughly 40 of these states. So these princes answered directly to the presidents, and then the presidents directly to the king. What that means is in this particular style of government, they basically had 3 vice presidents. We okay? Does that make sense? To be honest, based on the sheer size of the kingdom, this was probably the only effective way to pull this off. Okay? And here, keep reading in verse 2, of whom Daniel was first. So in this government, you have King Darius and Daniel. He's holding a position just as high In fact, based on size, even higher than that of what Joseph held when he helped the Egyptians get out of their famine. He was the second only to Pharaoh. That's literally where Daniel's at. That the princes might give accounts, end of verse 2, unto them, and the king should have no damage. This entire thing, they set up massive amounts of government bureaucracy because of the sheer size of their kingdom. They had to do this in order to rule things properly. Are we okay so far? That is, by the way, as far politically as I'm hoping to go today. If I rabbit trail, you can yell at me, okay? All right, verse 3. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. So verse 3 gives us a little bit more detail into Daniel as a human being, okay? Yes, we understand he's basically already second only to the king, even though he still holds the title of president, which means he's technically holding a title similar to two other gentlemen in this kingdom. We okay so far? But verse 3 shows that the king actually wanted to give Daniel an even higher position above these three presidents because, look at what the Bible says, an excellent spirit was in him. That's not just an internal thing. Look at a lot of Christianity today. I don't need to go to church. I don't need to dress like that. It's just my relationship with God. That is actually partially accurate. But if your relationship with God is right, the outside should show it too. Your actions, your words, the way you look, the way you dress, everything about you, if your relationship with God is that important to you, all of you shows it. That's exactly where Daniel's at. He had a relationship with God, which, by the way, he proves here later on in this chapter. But his relationship with God was so good that the outward proved it to a point where he was actually possibly getting elevated to one of the highest positions in government, which, by the way, at this point in the Medo-Persian Empire, he was going to be elevated to a position that didn't exist yet. The king had that much trust in him that he was willing to create an entirely new position and basically let Daniel run everything. That's impressive. That's the spirit of God that, by the way, all of us should be striving for. Okay? How many of you would love to get paid more at your job, to get moved up in a position? Except for those of you that, like, own a business like Mr. Ball. Okay, maybe he could be like a Lamborghini mechanic. I don't know, something amazing. So I saw this video the other day. Some guy was taking a one-of-a-kind Lamborghini Huracan. It's one of the most expensive vehicles Lamborghini's ever made. He was taking it to a show, and he hit a slick patch in the road and crashed it. $1.9 million in damage. You'd love to have that guy come into your shop. That would be... Just fix that one car and retire. That'd be awesome. So, an excellent spirit. Maybe they'll stop by Checkered Flag Auto because so many Lamborghinis go through Meriden. All right. Verse 4, then the presidents and the princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. So Daniel's so good. Literally, this is where we're at with Daniel. He's such a good person that people hate him. How does that even make sense? I don't get that in the slightest. It's like people that really despise our vice president. There's nothing bad on the man's record. He's a phenomenal human being. I've got a couple of friends that are pastors and assistant pastors in Indiana. And one of them, when Mike Pence was actually running for governor of Indiana, he came in and they didn't just let him speak and kind of introduce himself. He actually preached a Bible message out of the King James Bible. And the guy said 3 people got saved in his church. And they don't like him. I'm not saying Mike Pence is Daniel, but just to give you a physical, humanized, personal illustration of somebody we can all look up and recognize, that's where we're at. The media hates Mike Pence. Oh, he walked out when people protested the national anthem. Yeah, because they're whining rich babies. He has every right to walk out if they have every right to take a knee, correct? Oh, no, he's the vice president. Oh, so it changes. Fun. Moving on. These people wanted to get rid of Daniel because he's taken their job. End of verse 4. But they could find none occasion nor fault. So they're like, okay, what are we going to do? I'm just thinking, how many of you ever watched the Disney cartoon Phineas and Ferb? That is one of the best cartoons ever invented. It's so dumb. I love it. I'm thinking these guys are that Doofenshmirtz guy, the really, really smart guy that's too dumb to ever take over the world. That's basically every cartoon ever, okay? I'm thinking these guys are in the background just like, twirling their little mustache and just wondering, how are we going to get rid of this guy? And nobody's got a clue. There's 122 people trying to get rid of him. And none of them can find anything. For as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Do you know Daniel's one of the few people in your entire Bible that there's no fault found in? That's impressive. When the world can't find something wrong with you, you're doing well. That, by the way, should be what we should all strive to be. To live with such to use verse 3, an excellent spirit, that nobody can find anything wrong with us. By the way, I know I'm not living up to that. My mouth's way too big to be living with an excellent spirit. I say what's on my mind way too frequently. Working on it. I'm quieter now than I used to be, which means by the time I'm dead, I'll be super quiet. All right? Verse 5. If you didn't get that, I'll be dead. They don't talk, okay? All right, verse 5. Then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. So they realized, we're not going to find him breaking any of the Medo-Persian laws here. We couldn't find it when he was under Babylon's rule. We can't find it now. So we're going to have to actually kind of work around here based on what religious beliefs we know he's got, which meant at some point between verse 5, verse 6, and verse 7, these guys had to study the Bible. If you read verse 5 properly, it says, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God, which meant these guys had to go get a copy of the Bible and read it. They had to go read the Bible to find something to find bad about this guy. Wouldn't that be phenomenal if people really were bothered by you being such a good Christian that they went and got a Bible to read it to find out how to get rid of you? Now, it's a bummer these guys didn't read it and believe it. Would have changed things drastically. Well, it did anyways. They died. So, all right, verse 6 here. They assembled together. Verse 6 says, then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. Which, by the way, that wasn't them brown-nosing or sucking up to the king. That was literally how you were required by law to address the king in the Medo-Persian Empire. Was king, fill in the blank, whatever the name is, live forever. Not because they literally thought he was going to, never die. It was just the idea that, kind of a Vulcan, live long and prosper, okay? Same concept. I've been watching all the old Star Treks, so forgive me if they slip in a lot, okay? They're clean and they're really dumb, and my wife hates them, so it's great, all right? Everybody leaves me alone when I watch them, so it's awesome. All right, verse 7. The other two presidents and the princes, okay? These other groups of people here, they hadn't consulted Daniel about whatever their law was. So they come to the king with this new concept for a law, which we're going to read about. They clearly didn't ask Daniel, hey, what do you think about this law? Which, by the way, meant they were actually skirting the law, because if he was first among the presidents, it should have ended with Daniel before going to the king. So they had to skirt the law in order to pass the law. Affordable Health Care Act. They had to skirt a law which requires that you can't make anybody in America buy anything specifically. Look it up. It's in the Constitution. I'm teaching government right now. We have read the entirety of the Constitution. Those girls hate me. We've read the whole Constitution. It's in there. But now you're required to buy it. Okay, moving on. Verse 7. I told you, I'm going to try, but I'm not doing good today. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute. Okay, let's pause for a second. This is a huge list of human beings here. This is the presidents, which is 2 out of the 3, because Daniel clearly was not consulted. Had Daniel been consulted, he probably would have been like, no. Okay, so we got these 2 presidents, governors and the princes. Now, we don't know how many were listed as governors. Princes, we know that there's at least 120. Counselors and captains. So they've been spreading this thing. This information's been going out. That means there's a whole, it started with just 122 people wanting to get rid of Daniel. We have no idea what that number's up to now, but based on the size of the kingdom, it's probably a lot. They've got the government involved. That's the presidents, the governors, and the princes. They've got lawyers involved. That would be the counselors. Okay, they also, in some cases, counselors in the Medo-Persian Empire were also magicians, which was weird. And then the captains, they've got the military involved. They've got as many government employees as they possibly could to be involved here. And here's what they come up with. They have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. So we've all talked about it, all of us, this whole group of people, and we want to sign a law, a royal statute, that for 30 days, no one's allowed, let's read this again, that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man, meant you weren't even allowed to go ask your neighbor for a cup of sugar. You had to go ask the king. We never think about that part. That's any petition of God or man. You weren't allowed to ask for help for 30 days. Do you realize the level of crime that would have happened in the Medo-Persian Empire in that 30 days? If you're not allowed to ask for help, you're being mugged, you're being robbed. You're not allowed to ask for help unless you ask for the king's help. How often are people 3,000 miles away going to be asking the king's help? This, by the way, one of the dumbest laws written in the Bible. Look at it. Look at all the laws in the Bible. You can't ask for anyone's help, God or man, of any kind except for the king for 30 days. This was stupid. This was foolish. By the way, this could have hurt these people. They were actually putting themselves in some level of danger here, okay? They couldn't even ask, like I said, they couldn't ask each other for help or favors. All requests had to be made to the king. Do you know how obnoxious the king's office must have been for 30 days? That would have been atrocious. Everybody and their grandmother literally shows up. Mr. King, hi. I need a teaspoon of cornstarch for my recipe for dinner tonight. And you're one of like 18,000 in line to ask the king something. If think about it, we're human beings. If we need help, most human beings have zero issues asking everybody for help. Correct? Okay? Look at Facebook. Get on Facebook for 5 minutes and everybody and their grandmother wants something from you. Okay? 30 days of this? But they were able to win. They got this to pass because they played to the king's pride. In the Medo-Persian Empire, and this was not uncommon, once the king actually went through what we consider today the coronation ceremony, he was actually proclaimed king. He was literally deified. He was considered one of the pantheon of gods that they had. He was nowhere near the highest as far as in the Medo-Persian Empire. He was not the highest god, but he was a ranking god. So this actually played both to his pride and to his position. The only people that can pray, the only thing you can pray to for 30 days is me. Ooh. You realize for 30 days, the king's already all powerful. This is basically an absolute monarchy. This is a dictatorship, if you will. He's got all the power in the world. But for 30 days, if anybody needs anything, they have to ask me. And I can say yes or no. Unfortunately, as a human being, that plays to our pride. I get to control somebody's life or death here. This is a huge deal, okay? The king obviously went by it, okay? Jump to Revelation chapter 13. Revelation chapter 13. We're going to jump around in our Bible starting here. We're going to include a lot of other Bible. We had to lay the foundation here. Revelation chapter 13. Unfortunately, Darius wasn't the last deified world leader. There's one right now. He sits on a throne. He wears a funny hat and a dress, and his home is called the Vatican. He speaks ex cathedra. He is the voice of God on earth. He's called the Pope. He's not the last one, though. Revelation chapter 13, look at verse 11. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live. And look at verse 15. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. So the very last world leader on this earth, as we know it, that demands deification is actually going to be the beast of Revelation. By the way, the very last world leader that also demands worship, but is deity, is God himself when he comes back. We're not going to look into that. You understand the second coming of Christ. When he comes down, Armageddon happens. The whole world's going to bow down to him whether they like it or not. And that's the coolest part about the God we serve, is he wins no matter what. Go back to Daniel chapter 6. Go back to Daniel chapter 6. I told you I'm probably not even going to come close to finishing today. I'm trying here. Daniel chapter 6 verse 10. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house. So Daniel's found out that this law passed. Okay? He went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. So Daniel just went and started doing exactly what he'd already been doing. Windows open, kneeling, and facing Jerusalem. By the way, he wasn't the first person to introduce this idea of facing Jerusalem when they prayed. Go to Acts chapter 5. Acts chapter 5. Oh, that's not the verse I was looking for. Sorry, go to 2 Chronicles chapter 6. Wrong place. I got ahead of myself. Sorry. 2 Chronicles chapter 6. This is an indication of why Daniel more than likely faced Jerusalem. 2 Chronicles chapter 6, look at verse 34 with me. It says, if thy people go out to war against their enemies by the way that thou shalt send them, and they pray unto thee toward this city which thou hast chosen, and the house which I have built for thy name. Okay, so here's Solomon's prayer at the dedication of the temple of God, and he's actually kind of instructing the people, if you're away from home, face the temple, face Jerusalem, and pray. Now, is that because God couldn't hear them if they faced the opposite direction? No, it was just a sign of reverence. This wasn't any specific reasoning, as in like all the followers of Islam have to pray facing Mecca every day. In their case, they're just really hoping it's going to get there. We have a God that's everywhere. So he hears it all no matter what direction we're facing. This was just a sign of reverence. Go to Acts chapter 5. I got my notes out of order. I apologize. Acts chapter 5. Daniel is actually doing something that we later see the apostles doing. He's following God's law above man's law at this point. Okay? Man has set a law that you can't ask any petition, you can't pray to anyone other than the king for 30 days. Acts chapter 5, verses 28 and 29. We probably know this account, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. It says, Acts 5:28 says, saying, did we not straitly command you that ye should not teach in his name? And behold, ye have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine, and intend to bring this man's blood upon us. Verse 29, then Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than men. Okay, the apostles were actually being threatened with jail here. And if you read through verse 28, it says, didn't we tell you, you shouldn't teach in his name? Didn't we command you not to teach in his name? And behold, ye have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine. They're trying to claim that everything that the apostles are teaching here is just their own stuff. It wasn't. It was the power of God unto salvation. They were teaching God's doctrine. And here's the big rub, the last part of verse 28, and intend to bring this man's blood upon us. These are the same guys that had Jesus killed, and they're upset because these guys are teaching that those guys had Jesus killed. Of course they are. A couple of them watched it happen. Of course they're pointing out the bad guys. By the way, God does it. They weren't doing anything inappropriate. And by the way, they kept on going. And they kept on going. And they kept on going. And every one of them kept on going until God said, all right, we'll let the bad guys win for this moment. And took them out, one by one. But they obeyed God's law rather than man. Now, this isn't your excuse to speed on the way to church because you're late. If you're late to church, that's your fault. Okay, going 75 down 15 I'm obeying God's law. No, you're not. God doesn't have a speed limit, you weirdo. Okay, I've heard people tell me that. Well, I got caught speeding on the way to church, but I was just trying to get to church faster. Just leave earlier or don't stop at Dunkin'. All right, moving on here. Okay, verse 11, Daniel chapter 6 and verse 11. These princes here had gathered. You realize at this point, Daniel's praying. He's doing what he's supposed to. And by the way, he's not hiding it. When you're praying in front of an open window, you're pretty bold about what you believe in. Okay, verse 11. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. These dudes are spying on him. In 21st century America, they'd go to jail for stalking right here in his house. That's creepy. By the way, it says, then these men assembled. There's no indication that this group has gotten any smaller. So there was at least 122. Then in a later verse, Bible gives us even more. There's this entire crowd of human beings trying to hide, watching Daniel pray. Do you really think Daniel didn't know? I mean, unless he lived in like the one high-rise in the Medo-Persian Empire and he was like top floor and they had binoculars which weren't invented yet, Daniel had to have known these people were there. Because, by the way, 122 people can't be quiet no matter what. There's only like 60 of us in here, and I'm surprised nobody's phone's gone off yet. Okay? We can't be quiet no matter what. 122 plus people sitting outside this dude's house, stalking him, waiting for him to slip up. You really got to hate somebody if you're going to the level of stalker. Okay? Verses 12 and 13 here. Then they came near and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. Hast thou not signed a decree? So they come in, and just the connotation of the way these verses are written, I kind of imagine these guys kind of sneaking in. Don't you get that out of that a little bit? Then they came near and spake before the king. You get the idea that they're kind of whispering at this point. Didn't you sign a decree, Mr. King, that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save of thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? Can't you just see? There's this group of people like, hey, didn't you sign that law, a couple days ago? Didn't you do that? Yeah, I thought I was there. I remember that. How many of you got kids and somebody's tried to turn them in? Or they tried to Mom, didn't you say they're not supposed to do that? Callie's notorious for that in our house. Drives me nuts. Mom, didn't you say Paisley wasn't supposed to play with that right now? While she's doing something she shouldn't do herself, okay? That's the connotation I'm getting out of this verse is 7-year-old girl, okay? It's just, these guys are already annoying me, all right? If they're not annoying you, you haven't been reading the same Bible as me, all right? The king answered and said, the thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. And we get a clue into some history here that is extremely unique. In the Medo-Persian Empire, their law was unstoppable. Once a law was written, it could not be changed. If the king himself attempted to change it, he was automatically resigning his throne. He'd be beheaded, and somebody else would take his throne to change that law. They believed once a law was set, because it always had to be set with a group of people in place so that it was publicly discussed to kind of get all views, that once it was set and the king had signed it and sealed it, then it was good enough for everybody and it should never change. There were laws that King Darius was following at this point that were 300 years old. Okay, did you know in Hartford, it is illegal to kiss your wife on the sidewalk on Sundays? That's a law that was set up in the 1650s. It's still there. You know the last time anybody got arrested for that? The 1670s. And it's still a law. That's a stupid law. Do you know St. Louis, Missouri, 1827, they passed a law that you're not allowed to walk your giraffe down the street without a leash. Why was that a problem? You know, St. Louis isn't known for their herds of wild giraffe. You got to read stupid laws in the United States. They're amazing. King Darius is following laws that, by the way, at 300 years old, they would have been considered completely outdated. They were still following them, though, because they weren't allowed to be changed. So the king himself is held to this law. Verse 13, then answered they and said before the king, that Daniel, don't you love how this starts off? They're getting more and more into that annoying 7-year-old tattletale here. That Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah. By the way, they get all racist here for a second. They're all upset. Well, maybe that applies into why they're having an issue with him in the first place. Most of these other gentlemen, if you look up the history of this era, this time period when Daniel would have been here, which, by the way, he is an extremely well-documented character in history. Even people that don't believe the Bible cannot state that Daniel did not exist because his name is written all over both the Babylonian and Medo-Persian empires. All over. Daniel was a slave. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. Which is of the captivity, of the children of the captivity of Judah. Daniel was marked. Daniel was decidedly different in how he looked, everything about him. This kid was a slave. He's an adult now. They had an issue with him being in charge. Because what that meant is the king trusted somebody who was considered a slave more than he trusted them as free men. We get into I'm not going to spend time on it, but there's a very real tie-in with a racial issue right here, if that's exactly how they described him. Racism isn't new. And unfortunately, unless the whole world gets saved, it's not going away. Because people are stupid. Because red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. Isn't that how that song goes? Jesus loves the children of the world. Doesn't matter. But this is an issue right off the bat here. Regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. Hey, that kid, that slave kid, the one that you put in charge over us, he doesn't care what you say. They're trying to undermine Daniel's character, his position, him as a human being. They're literally trying to rip this guy to shreds in one sentence. Verse 14. Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself. In that instance, the king realized, these guys trapped me. Because you realize Daniel was the only one of the presidents and the princes not there when this law was put in place. That's odd to begin with. The king may not have thought of that initially. We're talking a large group of people. 122 plus human beings are in front of the king. He may have just dismissed the fact that Daniel wasn't there. And it's here in verse 14 he realizes he's been caught. These guys planned this entire thing to get rid of Daniel. It says he was sore displeased with himself and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And keep reading. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Because he had been turned in, the way the law of the Medes and Persians worked, you had until the end of that particular day, of the day of your accusation, to prove yourself innocent. The king spent the day trying to go to bat for Daniel. The king's not the bad guy in this story. A lot of times when we teach this to children, the king is the bad guy because the king threw Daniel in there. The king did everything in his power to protect Daniel. The king loved Daniel because he wouldn't have been sore displeased with himself for any other reason. This is where we're going to stop today. We'll finish it next week. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for everything you do for us, Lord. Thank you for this church. Thank you for these people. I love them all dearly, Lord. Thank you for having a place like this for all to come from anywhere and just learn about you. Lord, bless the service today. Again, give Pastor the words, the wisdom. I know he's not feeling terribly well this morning. Lord, just help him to feel well for the remainder of the morning, Lord, so he can preach and teach with power. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. You are dismissed. Church starts in 15 minutes.